Good morning and welcome to the Space Madness podcast. I have with me a very interesting person with a long and distinguished and diverse NASA career. Some of my favorite types of stories to share. And why Space Madness? It really is, as I've said over and over again, it just captures to me the feeling of trying to explore the universe, an empty, hostile universe that's trying to kill you and break your spacecraft. And yet humans are driven to do it anyway. So as always, I get a different answer out of my subconscious every time I ask the question why I named it that. So with that, Jason Derleth is with me today, recently retired from NASA. I'm going to have him introduce himself because it's had such an interesting career that I wouldn't even know how to summarize it in one sentence.
Well, thank you, Jeff. That's very kind of you. I've been very lucky with my career, and it's kind of weird. I always, when somebody asks me to introduce myself, I start with, well, I'm kind of an odd duck because, I didn't have any of the traditional background that folks have. When I grew up, I always thought I was going to be a fantasy author. And I ended up writing 2 fantasy novels, but they didn't take off. So, and I already worked at NASA by then anyways. I guess to get started, I'd have to start way back before I went to college, believe it or not.
Well, before we get there,
Sure.
what was your last role at NASA? Just
Okay,
to level
that's a
set.
fair question. We'll start with that. I was the chief technologist for 2 astrophysics programs at Goddard Space Flight Center called the Physics of the Cosmos and the Cosmic Origins program. Role that I was in was to sort of usher the new technologies that would be needed to fly the next space telescope. Coatings for mirrors, advanced coatings that would allow for reflectivity down into the, very infrared sort of side, or maybe higher up into the ultraviolet. New ways of measuring where the mirrors were placed next to each other and how well they stayed in phase with each other, or any one of a number of technologies meant to stabilize the spacecraft and keep it extremely still in the reference frame. So very, very exciting and advanced stuff. But before that, I was the program executive for the NIAC program, the NASA Innovative Advanced Concepts program, for a number of years. And before that, program manager for that same program. For more than a decade, I was involved in the leadership of NIAC. And that's, of course, where we met when you were a NIAC fellow. So a title that I hope you wear with pride.
I do, and 15 years after I started at NASA now, it continues to be the most interesting work that I've done. The hardest to kind of categorize or put in a box. I did it while I was a JPL employee. I did it independently. I unsuccessfully did it in 2017 or proposed something. And I tell kids that I tell people that basically NIAC is what you think NASA is when you're 6 years old. And in fact, it is a very small percentage of NASA, but it is still there. So I'm very happy to see that. So I'm as you were introducing the astrophysics role, I got wondering. So I would imagine in that subject matter would include the various technologies used to keep the detector surfaces and telescope surfaces flat, or at least the right amount of flat. And that has always amazed me. There's a lot of things that amaze me, but one of the things that amazes me is how flat we can keep something in space, which sounds really obscure and strange, but if you're listening to this, you probably will think, oh, I never thought of that before. But we have to keep surfaces stupidly flat, stupendously flat, beyond human imagination, it seems to me, in order to reliably collect light from some of these distant objects. So all of these things have to be considered. And I imagine this had some involvement with James Webb, and it, as I would imagine, is the most recent example of extreme telescope surface control and thermal control and all that.
Yes. Yeah, I think the mirrors are not only are they not exactly flat on JWST, but in fact they are not at the same curvature each because of the way that they are arrayed. They had to be exactly perfectly curved to bring the focus in, and each one is slightly different. But I was not the optical designer of JWST, so please look that up. It is exquisite.
Yeah.
And the surfaces have to be perfect to something on the order of 1/10 of a wavelength across the entire surface, average root mean square error. So it's pretty exacting, as you're saying. And in fact, one of the big questions was when you're polishing the mirror, the big mechanical polishing cloth hits the edge and rounds over that edge very slightly. And what effect does that have on the edge? It's really fascinating. To go back to, how I got to NASA, it's really odd, I think, in many ways. I wasn't one of those kids who grew up dreaming about working at NASA. That was something that other people did. Other people who were really good at math and really good at science. And I mean, I just never thought of myself that way. So when I learned about I started going to college at my local junior college, actually, when I was 16.
Where was that?
That was in Santa Rosa, California,
Okay.
Northern California, about an hour north of San Francisco. And Santa Rosa High School shares a very long border with Santa Rosa Junior College, which is one of the top junior colleges in the country.
Okay.
And so the high school allows the high school students to take classes next door to meet their graduation requirements. And so I started doing that at 16. And I had a great time over there. But one of the things that I noticed was that everybody seemed to have the same goals for their lives. Go get that degree, go get a decent job, work your way to management. It just sounded so boring, Jeff. I couldn't do it. And so when I graduated, I had a job. I got a job at a record store. And I enjoyed working and helping people find their music, and I love music, and it's fantastic and great. And oddly, though, I ended up working at a music store and working my way up to management, and leading kind of the exact life that I was trying to avoid. And then I found this really interesting college. I was dating a girl a little younger than me, and her mother was having troubles convincing her daughter to attend this college that the mother had gone to. And so she handed me the college catalog and said, "Could you read this and then talk to her? Because I think it's worth doing." And I read it, and she asked me the next day, "So did you read about it?" And I said, "Yes, I did." And if I weren't, 21 years old, I would absolutely be applying for this college. And she said, "Well, what does that have to do with anything? Why don't you apply?" And so I did. I wrote an application early that summer and sent it in the very first day that it was available to apply to, and I got a rejection.
Okay. What college was it?
St. John's College in New Mexico, Santa Fe, New Mexico. St. John's is a college with 2 campuses, and that will actually be important in just a second.
Okay.
There's Annapolis, Maryland campus and the Santa Fe, New Mexico. And it's a great book school. So, Jeff, what they do is you read, say, the first 4 chapters of the Iliad.
Okay.
And then you sit down with 22 students and 2 teachers. And one of the teachers asks a question. The question could be, my first question was, after reading this story, I noticed that a lot of the Greeks interact with each other in a very specific way. And they're always concerned about honor on the battlefield, honor to each other. We don't really have that same understanding of honor. And so my question to you is, what is honor to these Greeks, and why is it so important? And it was a great discussion, 2 hours long. We went over the time period of 2 hours, actually, kept discussing. It was a great class. Anyway, so St. John's denied me, and yet here I am talking about the St. John's classes that I attended. So I had actually turned in my application so early and received my response so early in the process that I was able to write an entire second application.
Oh, that's great. Okay.
And I sent it in. And I did this because the course catalog talks about how if you show us that you want to come, we will let you in. Okay? And so I did this and literally rewrote every essay with a different topic, talked about different things. And then they sent me another rejection. And I mailed them. I said, "Hey, you said you'd let people in that wanted to come. Haven't I just demonstrated that I really want to come?" And they said, "Well, I had just had my birthday a little earlier that year. So, well, a 22-year-old who hasn't been in an academic program in a while is a risk that we see. If you go back to school and take a full course load and get nothing less than a B, then we'll consider you." And so I did exactly that. I enrolled at the college again, the Santa Rosa Junior College. I started taking a full course load, and I was getting great grades. It was actually straight A average for that semester. And halfway through it, I thought to myself, "Hey, wait. It's one college with 2 campuses. I wonder if the admissions offices talk to each other." So I hit print on that second application, for what they called a February freshman class. Instead of starting in the fall, we'd be starting in February, work through the summer to catch up, and then start as a sophomore in the fall. And I guess they don't talk because the Annapolis campus invited me to come in that later that February, later that academic year. And so I got to come in February, and I had just an absolute blast at that college, and I fell in love with music all over again. It's the last college on the face of the earth that does two things. The first one is to teach Ptolemaic astronomy, so Earth centricism. Yeah, and it's done because the degree is really a degree in philosophy and the history of math and science, okay? So that as the history of math and science, Ptolemy is very important, right? But even the Naval Academy doesn't teach it anymore, even though it's useful for navigating on the seas at night. We've got GPS. We don't need it. The second thing that they do is they make every single student sing in chorus. And I defy anyone to sing the chorus of the Furies with 80 other people and not fall in love with music. It's absolutely phenomenal to do these things. It's really amazing. And so I realized in sophomore year when we were doing a music theory for music appreciation as opposed to music theory for musicians, that the only way you can really learn music thoroughly is to play an instrument. Up until that point, I had always had a little bit of a trouble following through, kids, right? So I thought I better give myself some sort of an investment in music so that if I ever drop learning how to play something, then I'm going to pick it back up again someday. And so I talked to the school. They had a defunct wood shop. Nobody was using it. And I said, can I run the wood shop as my student job? And they said, yeah, why do you want to do that? And I said, well, I want to build my own cello, and the wood shop's right there. And they said, you're crazy in the best way, but you're crazy. Yeah. Here's the keys.
Can I pause for a cello story? I just love this.
Yeah, please.
And I'm so glad that we're talking because I love stories like that, creative solutions to self-actualization.
Right.
I just love it. But just real quick, the story is this. My father-in-law played cello until he was 16 and then took 50 years off for his career and family. And at 66 recently, picked it up again. And his teacher was still teaching the same one. And so now he practices with her again. End of story.
Fantastic. Well, it gives me hope because when I finally did get to NASA headquarters, it was JPL. I still practiced and took lessons. Okay. Headquarters, that was it. I couldn't do it. But so I taught myself by buying books on the subject and buying my own hand tools to do the handwork. How to build violins, and then I built my own cello. And in senior year at St. John's, there's a competition where they have anyone who's done anything in the arts or the sciences submit a masterwork, essentially, right? Something that they've worked on for however long. Yeah. And I submitted my cello, and they got real cellists and real cello makers to come and look at the instrument, play the instrument, and judge the instrument on a scale of 1 to 100. And I won the Baird Prize for the arts. So I built an award-winning cello. So,
I can only imagine when these judges were introduced, they were a little incredulous. I mean, did they pick it up and was there like a clear light bulb moment? Holy crap, this guy actually built a decent cello. I mean, that's amazing. Yeah.
Eric Stoltzfus ran the St. John's College Music Library, and he wrote me a one-page description of what it looked like for him to see me build this thing, and how I came in and told him that, I'm going to go build a cello, and he said, you might want to consider buying a kit and building a ukulele first or something? I said, no, it's got to be cello. And he said, imagine my surprise when 4 months later he came bounding through the door again. And he said, you were right. A cello really is too hard. So I built myself a violin. Would you like to see it?
Do you still have these?
Yeah, I have the cello and one other cello that I built afterwards, and then one of the violins, but that one is in pieces. I sold the other violin to a musician at the college. He's also one of the professors there. But
so if you send me a photo of one of these things, I think that's the image for our episode banner for sure.
Okay, I'll take a look. I have
Sure.
one good photo of it.
Okay.
Maybe another one, or I can take another photo of it. It's
Okay.
just downstairs in the case right now.
Sure.
I keep noodling on now that I'm retired, I'm going to get back to that cello really soon. And then I've
Mm,
just been busier in the last 2 weeks since my retirement that I
mm,
ever have been, maybe. So I haven't
mm.
gotten to it yet, but it's
Sure.
partially because we've got a family vacation planned next
Oh,
week. And
great.
so after we get back, I'm fully
Sure.
intending on picking that sucker back up.
Sure.
So
Sure.
when I went to class one day, I also realized that I didn't want to be a professor in a university
Hmm.
or a lawyer, which is another thing that a lot of St. John's people do, actually.
Okay.
And so I really wanted to do something more scientific or technical. And so
Mm.
I went to my most technical professor and I said, "Can you help me find something?" And he said, "Sure, I know somebody across the street at the Naval Academy. Let me talk to her." And so I volunteered my time in a laser laboratory
Mm.
probing neodymium doped fluoride crystals for
Mm.
up conversion and blue laser lasing. We didn't
Okay.
find anything, unfortunately, but I did
Uh-huh.
manage to spend quite a bit of time in a laboratory polishing crystals and setting up lasers and probing those crystals. It was really, really fun. And thank you,
Okay.
Dr. Anne Marie Novogradic. You have made
Mm.
my life possible, truly, really
Wow.
amazing. So that, combined with excellent grades, combined with the building of the cello on my own,
Mm.
and inspiring others to build instruments while I was there at St. John's,
Mm.
made it possible for me to write a pretty good application package to MIT. MIT is a very sink or swim place.
Mm.
Engineering thinks differently than scientists, and St. John's it's in the science sort of mode of thought, science and
I see.
liberal arts. So I went from a degree in philosophy to trying to survive in aeroastroengineering at MIT. And
Wow.
it was not easy. Thankfully, Dr. Wes Harris, one of the professors there,
Mm-hmm.
when I sat down with him and whined to him, "Why is this so hard?"
Mm-hmm.
listened to me and gave me shrift for coming with a philosophy
Huh.
background. I was able to talk to him about Descartes' Discourse on the Method, which talks about
Yeah.
how you actually sit down and learn an equation. And I said, "Your homeworks aren't anything like that. You
Huh.
don't give us enough time or practice." And he said, "Well, we can't. The students here will
Yeah.
literally work themselves to death if they have the opportunity. We have to limit how much homework we give them because they'll work
Hmm.
24 hours a day. It's a very unique culture here, and we actually have to manage the students in the right way, or they'll burn
Mm.
themselves out." And what a wise and wonderful and kind man
Wow.
Wes Harris is. Without his help, I would never have survived, but with his help, I thrived eventually.
Okay.
It took me a year.
Uh-huh.
But I did manage to graduate with a master's degree in aeroastroengineering, and I got to go work at JPL, just like you, which
Yeah.
was a thrill of a lifetime. I got to work on Curiosity,
Mm.
some in the systems engineering team, but I primarily worked on technology portfolio optimization. So how do you mathematically choose a suite of technologies to develop to both reduce overall mission risk
Mm.
while simultaneously maximizing the return on the investment dollar of the taxes of the United States government?
Wow.
It is
What a
challenging and fascinating and interesting, and I have published papers on this. And so I got to go to headquarters to serve on a review panel for advanced technology
mm-hmm.
proposals to the human spaceflight portfolio.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the people that worked there, Dr. John M. Falker III, commonly known as J. Falker,
Yeah.
I was impressed with the way that I handled myself. And when he was given a huge project to do, he
Mm-hmm.
called me up as one of the first people that he thought of to come help with this, which was the Exploration Systems Architecture Study. The goal was to go back to the moon under 2003 administrator
Mm-hmm.
back in that time period. So that was Mike
Griffin.
Griffin. Thank you, Dr.
Yeah.
Griffin. And Mike was a real character to work for. He was fantastic in so many ways. I've never met a more technically apt person in my life. And
Well, I
yet
want to
I
go
was
back.
able.
Yeah. I want to go back for a moment to
Sure.
your JPL role.
Yeah.
My first reaction is to think, what an interesting combination of philosophy and engineering.
Yeah.
Sounds perfect.
Yeah, it was really helpful. And it was really something working at JPL too, because surrounded by a whole bunch of people that are so effective and so passionate about what they do, the exploration, planetary exploration for the solar system is it's a mission. And it's a mission that people really believe in there, and so many smart and effective people. And yet it was really quite something when I got to do some of this work, because I sat down with my project manager, Chuck Weisben, and Chuck said, well, here's a project. I expect it'll take you to the end of the fiscal year. It's July 10th or so when I came in. And go meet with Guillermo Rodriguez, a really kind and wonderful man that showed me what he was doing. And I sat down and I looked at it, and then I sat down and started to imitate what he was doing in the past. And I said, well, this is a little inefficient, I think. If I write some VBA code behind the spreadsheet that he was using, I could automate it and try it out and see if it worked. And I did that. So somewhere around July 18th, I think, it was about a week after I'd gotten the project, I came back to Chuck and said, well, Chuck, I'm done. Here's the work. And he said, well, but you were supposed to work on this until September. I don't. Okay, well, how about a slide deck describing it? That would be very helpful. And that was the beginning and an example of what continued to happen throughout my career. I often have been faster and more effective than most of the other people around me, and I don't know why exactly. I've been probably just very lucky in thinking in a different way than everybody else, which honestly probably came from St. John's. One of the repeated things that I've noticed helping at the agency was helping when people were in violent agreement with each other. At meetings, you get somebody saying, well, I think we really ought to be doing A, this thing that I'm going to call A, and it's really important that we do that. And somebody else says, no, what we ought to be doing is A prime, and here's why. And then they fight for a while and say, hey, guys, A and A prime are really the same thing. You just have one detail difference here, and I don't think it's an important detail. So let's agree to move forward, and we'll call it whatever you want, A double prime. Let's figure out what to call it so that you both get credit because you both had a good idea here.
Yeah. Well, I really like the recognition of thinking differently. I mean, I came to NASA with a space law background, the first space law degree awarded in the United States.
Fantastic,
Jeff. That's pretty weird background, but it led me to these opportunities where I saw program and higher level stuff at a very junior level.
Yep.
And particularly in mission design work, where I was from the very beginning thinking about portfolios of missions and programs across departments, and it turned out to be really useful, especially when I was writing my first NIAC proposal to pitch it in a way that was not just look at this cool thing we can build, which is the engineer's dilemma, but also these are the stakeholders that would benefit from this crazy idea, and so. You know, and that I'm very grateful for that perspective and having been encouraged to think that way, as I think that's the environment everyone's working in, whether they know it or not.
Well, and thinking that in that slightly different way, if you'll forgive the allusion to your work here, really does help you see around corners before you cross them.
Yeah,
I think it is like that. So.
Okay, so Jay hired you at headquarters.
Yeah, to work on that big project where we took a $2.2 billion technology development budget at NASA and reformulated it to make sure that it was focused towards getting back to the moon under Dr. Griffin and Mike. And Mike was pretty happy with that. So when he set up the program analysis and evaluation program, the head of that, Scott Pace, Dr. Pace, asked me if I would stay on and be an analyst in that organization. And so I did. And about halfway through PA&E's lifetime, I converted over to being a civil servant at NASA.
I see.
PA&E was often known, I think, as program aggravation and execution by the other mission directorates. They did not like us, and they had their reasons for not liking us. And under Griffin, it was a little bit harsh to really be having to justify yourself to these folks. And so PA&E eventually petered out and died.
I see.
It went back to the budget office, and they still do similar work in the budget office, but it's not quite with the same chutzpah, if you will.
Sure. Well, I imagine it's more challenging as the mission is less defined now.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
You could leave that there, but
no kidding.
Challenging.
So when space technology got started, Jay Falker had the opportunity to participate in that. I actually was one of the people on Lori Leshin's commission that set up the Office of the Chief Technologist that then later became the the Space Technology Mission Directorate. So I was a junior member on the team that determined the sort of organizational structure of STMD and what it was supposed to do. And so when Jay Falker came back to set up a program that had been killed under the PA&E rubric, under the Return to the Moon focus, called the NASA Institute for Advanced Concepts, the NIAC or NIAC program,
Right.
which had been an external institute for about 8 years, or no, 9 or 10 years, under the USRA group, Universities
Okay.
Science and Research Association. Jay decided to pull it into STMD as a program within STMD. And then when he had the opportunity to run it, he chose to do that, even though it was smaller than some of the things that were being offered to him. NIAC then called the NASA Institute Innovative Advanced Projects because it was now available for internal research as well as external research. So we changed the name. He took that chance to come run NIAC because it's just that important. In some ways, NIAC is the crown jewel of NASA. Like you said, when people first think of what NASA does, they imagine it to be what NIAC is, looking to what tomorrow's technologies could be and how do we get from here to there and what could tomorrow look like and how different can it really be. Jay chose the motto of change the possible.
And I think that lacking the inevitability of having to procure things from a commercial marketplace and an industrial marketplace and the sorts of gamesmanship that occurs, I think that is what NASA would be.
Yeah,
but ultimately we have to buy this metal from somewhere, to buy these parts from somewhere.
But then there's also something in there, Jeff, about you mentioned the engineer's dilemma. What about the project manager's dilemma, right? Let's just for a moment assume that when you're building a spacecraft, that there is essentially an unlimited amount of risk and that additional funding could burn down that risk, right?
Getting back to my initial comments about the universe trying to kill you.
Exactly right. An infinite amount of risk.
Yeah.
So now take a look at NASA's rules. We try and make things accountable, right? So a project that goes 15% or more over budget triggers a review, an expensive and challenging review that you have to show why you're going over budget so much, right? Well, what I just said, infinite amount of risk, trigger a review at 15%, means that a good project manager must spend 14.9% over budget. Must.
True.
Because that 14.9% has no consequences and it can burn down some of your infinite risk.
Right.
If you're not overspending, you're not doing your job.
Yeah. And that's that in that world where $1 is not worth as much as the next.
That's right. Yeah. And so it's really, really interesting because when you start thinking about it from that point of view, and then also from a project manager's, hey, what's my next job going to be like if I fail at this one point of view, right?
Right.
The drive to, at most, incremental improvement over last mission is very strong. And NIAC is the one place where we can go and really dream about what would happen if risk wasn't necessarily the only factor, if reward was also a factor.
Well,
high risk is okay if you get high reward.
Yeah, and one of the on the briefing call from the program office a few weeks ago, someone asked the question that I've always enjoyed wrestling with of where are the boundaries then? And you said something like if my idea requires all the titanium in the solar system, is that too far? And I forget who answered. Maybe it was Ron, but Ron basically the answer was, well, there's a practical limit that sometimes is beyond the engineering limit and sometimes is within the engineering limit. Sure, we might be able to build a Dyson sphere, but that's a much bigger than American projects, let alone human projects. So it was really fun, and it really, ever since I heard about the NAG program early at NASA, at JPL, I was just like, well, what other world am I going to play around in?
Yeah.
And I think I found that as a non-traditionally educated person, I really didn't have any fear of asking questions, the answers of which were presumed obviously violating the laws of physics or whatever. And I did a lot of smiling and nodding and writing things down and going home and reading about them. But I really am grateful for the way I showed up, because I was able to ask questions that I knew I didn't have traditional preparation in physics. So, and everyone else knew that. So I wasn't shy.
Right.
And people enjoyed explaining things, particularly why things were impossible, even at JPL. And I took that, and I took that very seriously. I said, look,
Yeah.
there's a
Yeah.
reason that JPL thinks this is impossible, and maybe it is. But this is how I wanted to learn physics, basically, or at least the practical application of physics as we use it. Okay,
Absolutely.
so you're working for Jay, you're living in DC, and you don't have time to practice your cello, unfortunately.
Right. That's where I ended up being Jay's deputy about 4 or 5 months into the program, and he made me the program manager as soon as he was reasonably able to do that. And about 5 years later, he graduated to a new position, and I took over the program from him and ran it for about 6 years. And I think, really did help build a community of innovators, space innovators, that is different than most communities. It's very collegial. People are not just willing to share with each other, but eager to collaborate with each other in a way that I don't see in a lot of other places. And part of that's because the money is so small.
Yeah.
And you can't even pay one person's salary for 9 months if they're a senior person
Right.
with the NIAC Phase 1. But you get to dream big and figure out how to make it possible. And it's made a big difference, I think. There are many different examples. I'll just choose one or two. The star shade, which was considered as an occulter to a space telescope, where you could fly a space telescope and then put this star shade a long way out in front of it, maybe even 100,000 kilometers in front of it, and fly it in between a star and the telescope just right so that it blocked only the star's light and you could catch the star's reflected light off of a planet. That became one of the major contenders for the follow-on to James Webb Space Telescope. Now, they went with an internal occulter because of risk,
Yeah.
but it was a serious consideration, and it made real progress happen on both the internal occulter and the external starshade. So really interesting. And there was a company started up in the Washington area, Seattle, Washington area, that has Helion Energy, that has received, it got its start partially from NIAC funding for looking at how you could do nuclear type propulsion through fission as opposed to fusion, which is what's been discussed in the past. Project Orion, if folks want to go look that up, was a fission thing. Well, what if you could do fusion, even pulsed fusion? And that's what Helion was looking at. And now they are one of the top contenders for fusion power generation on the Earth for creating electricity. Really exciting. I believe that in their multiple rounds of funding, they've actually received over $500 million in funding. And they got their start, at least somewhat, with a NIAC. And so that's very exciting. A third company, TransAstra, is looking to mine space materials from asteroids or comets. And that company is pretty much the only asteroid mining company left standing over the past 5 years.
Yeah.
Joel Sercel, Dr. Sercel, a good friend of mine whom I met back in 2000 as a student. He was a team lead at Caltech as a professor at Caltech on a partnership with MIT that I was involved in. And Joel has really done a lot of work and made a lot of progress. His method of mining may be the only one that can work with the physics. It is really exciting.
Well, I love this subject of communicating the value that NASA brings to the marketplace and the world. It's one of the hardest things to communicate well to the public. I often start with the apparently there was a membrane material built for the Apollo engine fuel system that then went on to be fundamental in kidney dialysis technologies.
Very nice.
I heard that from a distant relative of mine who was a kidney physician. I'm a hepatologist. I'm blanking. Anyway, so there's all kinds of spin-offs, but the word spin-off I've always thought doesn't really do it justice.
Right.
So I doubt that conversation is over, but
well,
something I enjoy trying to share with people when I get the occasional, why should we spend money on this?
So,
and my answer is always, how much time do you have?
Yeah, that's right. You could go on for hours and hours and hours. Like, we didn't create Tang. We went and bought it off the shelves. But there's all sorts of interesting things that really were invented at NASA that have become products and businesses today. In fact, it's such an interesting subject that a good friend of mine, Dan Lockney, runs the spin-off book every year. He creates the spin-off book.
Cool.
And if you look for, I think it may be spinoff.nasa.gov, but it could be nasa.gov/spinoff. I don't know. If you Google it, you'll find it. Every year he brings in some 40 to 50 examples of not just products, but entire companies and how they've taken NASA technologies and really built something new and interesting. But that doesn't even get at the impact, in my opinion.
Sure.
The impact really is in creating this new mode of thought of what's possible in the world. And it's just, you look at the way that we've inspired children with, you say, JWST's images or with the human spaceflight program, and they go into science and technology. And of course, space requires miniaturization and battery power things in a way that every time I get into my relatively new, purchased used electric vehicle that I have, I think to myself as I look around at it, wow, this Volvo, it's like it's really like a spacecraft. I unplug the plugs and I go out for a drive, and it's entirely self-contained like a spacecraft. You've got the batteries running the motors, and it's so much a spacecraft where you don't get to refuel a spacecraft, or at least most spacecraft don't get to refuel. So the cars are much more mobile because of that. So anyway, really exciting stuff.
I think you and I could go on for hours on that. I want to...
let me say two more things,
please.
and then we'll get back.
Sure.
I'm almost done. After NIAC, I went to the White House to work for the Office of Management and Budget for about 9 or 10 months. In the Office of Interagency and Regulatory Affairs, OIRA, which is a really neat place where all of the rules that are created in the government are essentially checked to make sure that they're reasonable and legal.
Wow.
Yeah, it's the amount of collaboration that's involved is through the roof. And if you've ever heard the term, it's like driving in the fast lane, implying that things are very busy. Well, working at OMB is much more like driving in oncoming traffic. It's so fast, so hard, so much stuff. I think I spent probably the first 4 months as a fairly large ball of stress that was managing everything that I could and still falling behind. It took me 4 months to be able to just keep up with the email. It was amazing. And I cannot tell you, Jeff, working at NASA is an amazing privilege, and some of the best people in the world work there, and working alongside those folks like Mike Menzel, the systems engineer for JWST. I worked closely with him at Goddard for 1.5 years, and I consider it one of the greatest honors of my life to work alongside Mike. Absolutely stellar individual. Nothing compared to the folks at OMB. The people there are so dedicated, and they spend so much time and so much effort to do the exact right thing as best as they possibly can do. It was the most heartening experience I've ever had in my life. Absolutely amazing. And I'm not putting Mike Menzel or anyone at NASA down at all. They are absolutely the best, but it was next level.
Well, when I lived in D.C. from 2014 to 2020, in 2014 we had a neighbor who was a staffer for a congressperson, and I had a lot going on. I had an infant and a toddler, but I talked to him a lot, and I was really heartened, as you said, by this person's commitment, and I hope he's doing something big now. But I want to go back to one. I do want to get on to the astrophysics role.
Yeah.
But I want to go back to just real quick to the NASA spinoff world. Now, I have read recently that it's not even a spinoff, actually, that in the 60s, the Apollo program was one of the main customers of the microcontroller and microprocessor industry, to the extent that it almost functioned as a growth capital for the whole industry, turning it into what it sounds like. You've heard this story too.
I have.
Can you add any color to it?
Very interesting. I don't have any information on it, but I do recommend you contact Dan Lockney and talk to him, because he knows this stuff amazingly well.
Sounds like a great guest.
Oh, if you think that I'm engaging and personable, then my goodness, I'm flat and boring compared to Dan.
Wow.
He is such a wonderful person.
Well,
absolutely amazing.
Gladly take an intro and get him on an episode.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm Maybe I should aim for 2 of these a week instead of 1. So okay, so
Well, with the way things are in the industry right now, there's probably a bunch of people with enough time to come talk
true.
to you. So my
Yeah.
LinkedIn feed is filled with regretful retirements right now. So it's a little bit.
Yeah.
I hope we make it through this in shining form because I think
Well,
we can.
I agree, and one of my goals is actually to almost redeploy some of these people to on contract to different space companies and organizations.
Great.
That's slow to develop, but eventually I think the outcomes are going to become the priority again.
Right.
And I want to be able to, I have utmost sympathy for any young person now entering the space world and wondering what's going on. Enough said about that. Now, so how did the astrophysics management role emerge from the NIAC
So when I
experience?
was done at OMB,
Mm,
I heard that this position was opening up, and it
mm,
was a very opportune time. The Habitable Worlds Observatory
mm,
is the next big space satellite
mm,
observatory that Goddard is designing
mm.
in its early stages right now. And this is sort of the spiritual follow-on to Hubble, actually. So
Okay.
we look at different wavelengths with different observatories, and the Hubble wavelengths are generally infrared to near UV. So a
Mm,
little bit near infrared, a little bit near UV, but all of the optical, all of the visible in between. And
mm,
so this space telescope will be similar in its wavelength. But it's design, and you can look online and find the current sort of thinking because they publish these things
mm.
publicly as part of their outreach periodically. It is a little bit like James Webb Space Telescope, but imagine JWST with a big baffle
Mm,
around it to protect the mirror because the cold mirror of JWST being exposed has allowed it to have micrometeoroid damage hit it. And so far, it
mm.
hasn't degraded the telescope very much at all because the
Okay.
wavelengths are longer and it's more tolerable of such damage. But an optical telescope is going to
Yeah.
degrade relatively quickly. And so a baffle will be needed to protect the mirror,
Mm,
but it doesn't need to be cooled like
sure.
JWST does. So it can be differently built. But
Sure.
again, it'll have that internal occulter in it called a coronagraph, which
Mm,
does some pretty neat blocking of the central star in the main coronagraph instrument, allowing us not just to view an Earth-sized exoplanet, but
mm.
bring in enough photons from it to actually do spectroscopy on that. And by doing
Okay.
spectroscopy, we'll be able to tell what elements
Mm.
are there and potentially prove life exists at another
Wow.
solar system. And so this was an incredibly exciting mission. And for somebody like me who has the grounding in philosophy,
Mm,
if you really think about it, you go back to the way that the ancients thought, and we walked on the earth and the heavens were the stars above.
mm,
Some of those stars wandered.
mm,
Planets. That's what
mm,
planet means, is wanderer.
mm,
And these planets wander in the sky in funny patterns back and forth and cross over the sky. And it started in some ways philosophy by looking
mm.
up at those things and saying, hey, what
Ah,
are planets? And why are they different than the stars? And how are they different from the stars? And what's going on up there, right? But then, along comes the Reformation eventually. Lots of things. The modernism comes, takes
mm,
hold. People talk about how science really took over finally, maybe in the 1600s, 1700s with Newton and everybody else.
mm,
And then you keep going forward in time, and eventually, what Newton predicted, which was, and this was a sea change in the way that we thought of things, right? Before it
mm,
was we walk on the planet and the heavens are something different. You read Newton's Principia Mathematica, and he talks about the moon being made out of stuff, the same as the
mm.
Earth. And this was like philosophically challenging at that
Huh.
particular moment in history. Nobody said this sort of thing, and he had to justify it with multiple paragraphs of how gravity might be affecting the Earth the same way as it's going around the sun, as the moon going around the Earth. And this
Mm,
was just absolutely strange and wonderful, but it turned out to be true, and it really made the entire
mm.
scientific world think differently, right? Well,
Well, thank goodness he had that break from Cambridge to go and
yeah,
think about it in an environment that was not dominated by the prevailing thinking.
that's exactly right. And it was a pandemic, I believe,
Oh,
right?
yeah,
So
yeah.
you never know what happens from things, where good
Sure.
comes from. But the most interesting thing to me is, you know, in 1969 we walked on it. It really is just stuff.
Yeah.
When you think about that accomplishment, that NASA astronauts walked on the surface of a heavenly body, the philosophical implications of that are just beyond the value of every dollar that the United States government has ever spent on NASA. That one thing changed the way that we interact with and think about ourselves and the universe. Finding life on another planet in another solar system is just like that.
Yeah.
It's that big of a deal. It is an unbelievable moment in the philosophy of the human race, and we're working towards getting there in the 20s. And I had the opportunity to come and manage a technology portfolio to enable that spacecraft to be built by the experts that had built James Webb Space Telescope. And so I came in raring to go, and had a really good list of credentials and everything. And Goddard is a bit of a machine. And Goddard folks generally don't trust headquarters folks, and rightly so, okay? The headquarters folks are much more worried with different things than whether or not this bolt is going to make the spacecraft fly wonky or be too heavy or cost too much because it has to be made out of titanium or any one of a number of highly technical, highly specific items that have to come together to make a spacecraft that not only can be built in the clean room, but have the instruments bolt onto it the first time and survive the rigorous testing that needs to happen to it to make sure that when it launches, it actually works. And so I'm afraid at the time that I got up to Goddard, it was just maybe a few months too late for me to get involved in the leadership of the mission. Maybe the way that it worked out is that I didn't get to be in the leadership of the mission. It was clear that about a year afterwards that I wasn't necessarily wanted. I wasn't disliked, I don't think. I think that everybody respected me and my accomplishments. But they had people that had just finished JWST and gotten it flying and operating that had a tremendous level of experience and knowledge about how to build and fly a space telescope. And those folks needed to be the ones in charge. And so I tried to gracefully step down and take care of the astrophysics program for technologies everywhere else, but it didn't make me happy. And so when the opportunity came to leave NASA and go do my own thing, which unfortunately I can't talk about quite yet, but maybe in 6 months we can get back together and talk about that. I jumped at the chance. Let the HWO folks, the Habitable Worlds Observatory, go and build their spacecraft and make history. I don't want to be in their way. I never wanted to be in their way. I just wanted to help manage that technology portfolio for them until it was a flight mission, and then hand it off to them at that point. But they got it. They've got the technology development down too. So I'm happy for them that they're going to be able to go and do this thing. It still has funding as of the latest presidential budget. So it's not as much as they'd like, but I hope that it's going to be enough to do some great things. So I'm Godspeed to them all. They're great people.
I really like the way you bring us up to the present now. And I wonder what you think of the following Goddard experience that I had, where I was a consultant there, and there was a partnership with APL, and I don't think this is controversial to share 7 or 8 years later, but they were so committed to getting solar electric propulsion onto the mission that it really, from my point of view as a consultant who was actually empowered to say what I thought, it really tanked the whole proposal because it was insisting on the inclusion of a technology that wasn't appropriate. And it's something I've written about in my self-published book, and I'm writing about in my non-self-published book right now, should I ever finish it. But the way that the different playgrounds of the NASA centers, the different silos / areas of expertise can sometimes, obviously most of the time, constructively interfere into something beautiful that works, and occasionally destructively interfere into a competition that doesn't the opposite of the direction. So I just wonder, obviously, to your level of comfort discussing such things, what, based on your Goddard experience, what does that bring to mind?
So, it is interesting. I've wondered a lot about leadership. You've seen probably on my LinkedIn that I've been posting on leadership a bit and thinking about it quite a bit. And partially that was because in the current environment that we're in, there appears in some ways to be a lack of leadership. at least from a particular viewpoint. A lot of this comes from maybe the same thought as Newton, right? Where we're walking on the ground and the leaders are up in the heavens doing their thing. No, it's all just stuff, right, Jeff? Those are people too. And they have families that they need to feed, and they have mortgages that they need to pay, and or car payments they need to pay. And they can't necessarily step out of line to do what they would consider real leadership, because then they're just going to get fired,
right,
or brought down. But leadership in the situation you're talking about is really interesting. Usually, I think that the technologies are thrown out way too fast. But to have something like that stick around and tank the mission, I can absolutely see that happening, and it's happened in multiple ways in multiple time periods. I think if you go back to, and I'll forget the correct X number, but one of the X systems that had integrated fuel tanks that were COPD fuel tanks, or I'm missing so many words right now. I hate when that happens.
Composite overwrap.
Composite overwrap. That's right. Composite
pressure. Composite overwrap pressure. Something.
Dome? No, probably not. So yeah, but it's a composite fuel tank.
Yeah.
And they were leaking and causing problems. And the X vehicle would have actually been lighter with aluminum tanks. And it would have been able to do its mission, which was single stage to orbit, essentially. Better without those composite fuel tanks, but those were seen as sort of a sine qua non, right? That without which there is nothing. That without which there is nothing. And so it tanked the mission. But they made
no pun intended.
Yeah, well, they made a lot of progress on composite fuel tanks, and today they're working and working well. So you can do these things now, but it was too early. And so what is leadership when you have a technological idea that drives you, and then that idea turns out to not be quite right? You know, the Wright brothers were the first ones to successfully fly an airplane. Why was that, though? Because there were other people trying. And one person, I think he was German, ordered an engine and built a plane and went to fly it, but the engine came in at over spec on weight. And he couldn't get off the ground, and I believe he died, but it's been literally 20 years since I've read this story, so I probably have every detail wrong. Go look it up. It's an interesting study.
I recall there were people much better funded than the Wright brothers at the time trying to do the same thing. So I really like bringing that back to a NIAC comparison of with small amounts of funding creating novel ways of thinking about things.
Yeah.
And I hope the listener will consider that in whatever field they're in, to think differently about a problem that they might be facing. Now, I do think that we have reached the end of our episode and our time. I love that theme of finding creative solutions, and even under self-imposed challenges, if necessary, to change the way you think, to force a different perspective, and to accomplish your goals. So I want to thank you, Jason, for joining me. I think we'll definitely do another episode when you're ready to talk about your next project.
I can't wait.
Yeah. And thanks again for your leadership over the years. And thanks to everyone for listening. Have a great day.
Thank you, Jeff. A real pleasure.
Same.